Well, I'm going to do something a little bit differently today because typically on a bar bat mitzvah, I will give a charge to the bar bat mitzvah person, the young woman or young man. And then a little later in the service, I give a sermon. Raquel's speech was so outstanding, and it touched on so many important notes that, including that which I was going to be addressing in my sermon, that I'm just going to thank you all for coming. And what I want to do actually is to combine the two in a certain way. I love the fact that you read your parsha with seriousness and that you were able to push back at it and to question it and to be able to say, I don't know why it's that way, or I wouldn't do that. Because the truth is about living a religious life in our eyes. It is about the capacity to continue to grow. And we continue to grow if we're willing to open our minds. We continue to grow if we're willing to question. And you are showing a great willingness to do this. I'm sure that your teenage years are going to be a lot of fun, especially for your mom. But I want to touch on a few very specific things here, okay? And as I do so, I want to tell you about an experience that I had. My wife and I, Toby and I, we went to a concert on Thursday night in Miami, performed by an orchestral group called New Deco. New Deco was, everyone should know about this and follow it, and if you can get down to Miami, go see them. New Deco was formed by two graduates of a great music school in New York City who believed that young people weren't participating in or going to see orchestras anymore. So they wanted to take their orchestra, and they did, and they wanted to apply orchestral music to music that is popular, music that people know, music that people love, music that people can dance to and jump up and down to. And in addition to the music that they play, and they've done a fantastic job, it's all young people and it's supported by foundations that help support young people in music and the arts. But in addition to the stuff they do as an orchestra, they also invite people to perform. It could be a great rap star, and then they have orchestral music behind it. It's something special and unique. So this past Thursday night, the featured star was a young woman by the name of Victoria Canal. Victoria Canal is currently living in England. She's a British folk singer. She's really young. She's much closer to your age than to my age. And her music, her folk music, is not only beautiful, but it also represents deep feelings of concern about our vulnerability, our loss, that which we don't have. She was described by the leader of Coldplay. You familiar with Coldplay? No. It's a very popular group. As having written what may be the great folk song of this generation or the next generation. It was a very, very moving and beautiful song. Well, I had read all of that about her before she actually came on stage. And then she plays guitar and she plays the keyboard. And then when she came on stage, I saw a woman carrying a guitar who had one normal arm and hand, and the other arm was kind of ended before her wrist, somewhere between her wrist and her elbow. She had a birth defect. And she played guitar beautifully. She strummed with that hand and she played the notes with the other hand. And she also was able to play keyboard beautifully and together with the orchestra. And what I felt like she was doing is that she was making a statement. And the statement that she was making was that she was not going to be held back by what she didn't have, but she was going to express the fullness of her heart through what she did have. It reminded me of a story from a long time ago where a great violinist by the name of Yitzhak Perlman came out with the San Francisco Orchestra, And he comes out in a wheelchair or with walking sticks and sits down, and he starts playing this piece with his violin. A violin has 4 strings, and one of the strings broke. And he continued, and he played the entire piece with a missing string. And when asked about it afterwards, he said, you know, what's important is not what you don't have or what you lost. What's important is what you have and what you make out of it. And I think that in some ways there's some very important messages like this in the Torah reading. So this gets me back to the approach that you were taking. That is, you look at the Torah reading and it could seem so out of date, arcane, we say, even irrelevant to our lives. And our challenge, and this, as you know, here is what I've been preaching about for 40 years, is to find the meaning behind it. Not to throw it away because we don't agree with it, not to throw it away because we question it, but rather to take it and say, what's it trying to teach us? And so the beginning of the parsha that talks about not farming your land in the 7th year may be teaching us that, you know, there's a time where we have to learn how to say, I've got enough, and I'm going to appreciate what I have. Or the parsha may be saying something about ownership, that none of us can own everything, and we have to be able to curtail that desire, and how very, very important that is. And then we come in, and then there's this authority telling us it, and it's God. And here you have a question about God. Questioning God is a Jewish tradition. No one's going to tell you what to believe. You're going to have to find out how you believe and what you believe. You have an understanding that you spoke about so beautifully of what it means to walk with God, and it has to do with kindness, and it has to do with giving, and that you want a life where you are walking with that God, and how beautiful that is. I want to tell you a story. It's kind of related. And I was thinking about it this week in the conversation about the Parsha. When I was a year younger than you are now, the year was 1965. At my synagogue, in addition to what we learned in Hebrew school, they had a program or a class for kids who were 12 years old, and it was ballroom dancing. The teachers, the leaders in the community, the parents, they believed that we shouldn't go to these bar and bat mitzvah parties and like stand in the corner not knowing what to do. So they taught us these dances that were like, I did it then, and then I think last year for Hanukkah, I gave my wife a gift, and the two of us went and took a few dancing lessons. But the dances were things called like foxtrot and cha-cha. Dances that, you know, like changed dramatically at that time in our growth, in our human history. Well, anyway, comes this one night, a week before this night, and they tell us, next week, we've invited all your parents to come watch what you do. Okay? I wanted to die. The thought of me dancing with Ellen, who I had a crush on, and with my parents sitting on the side, was just more than I could possibly bear. I spoke with my friends, and my friends felt the same way, but their parents were going to this dance also to watch them. So the night comes, and we always lived close to the synagogue. And I said to my parents, I don't want to drive with you. We'll meet there. So I leave the house, and as soon as I leave the house, the street lights went out. And then I walked to the corner where the synagogue was, and the traffic light was out. And then I looked at the synagogue, and I saw that it was completely dark. In 1965, there was a great blackout of the entire Northeast. I go to the synagogue, and the teacher and the maintenance guy are there, and they say, we're sorry, we had to cancel tonight. There's no electricity anywhere. And I looked up in the sky, and I said, thank you, dear God. What I later learned was that there were squirrels that got into power stations someplace upstate New York that were the beginning of the cause of this blackout. It wasn't God, it was a squirrel. But all of us have a desire. We have a desire to find a reason, something, for the world being as it is. So some people look and say, it's all about God. And some people look around and say, well, there are random occurrences, and there's a natural world. There are evil people. And there's a God in us. And the God in us makes us want to do the things that you're speaking about. The Torah doesn't give what's called a personal theology. It doesn't tell you how to believe in God. The Torah is a book of metaphor and stories about our people and the people's relationship with God, and what comes out of that is an obligation to behave in certain ways. And becoming a bar and bat mitzvah is really about responding to that obligation to behave in certain ways. About maybe about 40 to 45 years ago, there was a great rabbi who just died 2 weeks ago. His name was Rabbi Harold Kushner. He wrote a book called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, or When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And he turned the tokecha up on its end. He turned it around. And he said, it's not because of what you do. And he wrote the book because he had a son who was dying and who died in his teenage years. And he felt that he needed to do this book because he was a rabbi teaching this Torah. And so what he said is, there's stuff that happens in this world that nobody controls. It's random. Or there's a natural world where things happen. And there are bad people in this world. And he said where he found God was in people's willingness to come to him, to comfort him, to stand with him during that time. You opened all this conversation up. And you did it so very beautifully. You're very welcome. Very welcome. So that same year when I was a kid, I used to go to synagogue on Shabbat morning with a couple of my friends. And we'd sit and we'd sing. We liked singing the prayers, but we mostly talked and laughed in synagogue. But we had our own little tradition. After services every Saturday, we went to each of our homes. So one Saturday was my house, then my friend Dan's house, then Michael's house. And either our siblings who were home, our older siblings, or our parents would make us lunch. And one time we were at my house, and my sister made tuna fish sandwiches for the three of us, and then afterwards we'd play basketball. And after the tuna fish sandwiches, she said, I got a special surprise for you guys. And so the kids said, what is it? And she brought out a tin of Sara Lee fudge brownies. You ever have them? They're not so popular anymore, but those of you who lived a while ago, you know these brownies, right? So Michael Jacobson looked at my sister and he said, Judy, I don't know what we did this morning, but these brownies are proof of God. And I'll never, ever forget it. And the truth is that we find God in goodness. We find God in beauty. We find God in a piece of challah. We find God in kindness and in love. And you know it. Mazel tov.